Hello, and welcome to Broadcast Astrology Insight for Humans. My name is Lisa, and this is Sarah, and we're here for another month of a new moon. This month we have the Cancer new moon, and we will look at this new moon as we do every month as a predictive chart to get an idea for what this month ahead has in store for us. This month goes from July 5th 2024 until August 4th, 2024, which is when we'll have the Leo new moon. That's what we're doing here today. And so excited to be here with you. Sarah, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, I'll pull up the chart.
All right.
So looking at the lunation month, we see that it's in the seventh house of foreign relations. And so the first thing of note is there's a lot happening in the month ahead, how we're showing up on the world stage, how we're seen in terms of our foreign allies and enemies. And that lunation is also sitting right next to Venus. I think the topics that are near and dear to women are going to continue to be highlighted this month, as we've seen since the Aries ingress chart. We as the people show up in a place of some stress and strain this month in the sixth house. And I think a lot of this, Lisa, has to do with the continuation of that Jupiter Uranus energy that was with us earlier in the year. Right now, we have Mercury Jupiter parallel. And I think that there's still just a lot happening around a lot of activation of the mind, a lot of frenetic activity around news, communication, ideas. There's just a lot of things stirring us up right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess one of the first things I want to say about this is that we're just coming off of a new moon month, as well as a Gemini season, which has been very frenetic. I don't know about everybody else out there, but I know Sarah and I have both felt like we've been in a windstorm of activity. It definitely, for me anyways, I really felt that kick up right around the time that Jupiter was ingressing into Gemini, and as well as then the sun and everything else. And then we had that new moon in Gemini earlier in June. So this month, I think, despite some of the stress that we're underlying stress and overwhelm that we're still dealing with, one of the nice things about this month is that we do have this emphasis in Cancer, which gives us a chance potentially to settle into our emotions and feel our emotions, maybe have some fun, be creative. One thing that Sarah and I have talked about quite a bit with this chart is that there really is the potential for a lot of creativity this month, as well as having fun and that sort of thing, which we'll get to a little bit more down the road. So what piece did you want to pick up from there, Sarah?
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit more about that Venus, because in this chart, she's representing the house of play and children, as well as the sixth house of working people and volunteerism, and the house of leadership. And this made me wonder if, Lisa, we're always looking at the broad brush strokes of what's happening as a culture, the waves that we're riding. And then within that, how are we operating in our little communities? And I think that idea, like you said, about play is going to be close at hand. It's summertime. Can we allow ourselves to enjoy like some of the amusements of children and catch a movie, relax, take in some leisure, sport, play, and maybe even show up in our communities in a way we could ground ourselves through acts of service with Jupiter in the sixth house, in the house of volunteerism. Maybe there are ways we could support our local community and consider how we're showing up in service and in leadership in our local community. But whatever it is, it's Venusian, so I think it's going to feel good. There's a piece of just making connections and finding pleasure and anchoring ourselves in the things that bring us joy and connection.
Yeah, I almost wonder if it looks like it's potentially a great month for fabulous love stories, like romance movies to come out with some sort of fun but beautiful flavor to it. I don't know. That's just one thing that comes to mind from a more positive and fun perspective of this. And we'll get into ways that women are coming onto the stage once we reach the dial as well. We get a little bit more of a nuanced picture of this. One thing I did want to point out, since we're still on the new moon here, that where the moon and the sun come together, is that it's very closely conjunct the fixed star Sirius, which is the prime star of our galaxy. It's really interesting that we're having the new moon, the darkest point of the moon, over the brightest, happening conjunct the brightest star in our galaxy. There's something really beautiful about that. And I wonder if you guys get a chance to go outside and look at the night sky on this new moon, I think you might be able to see this beautiful fixed star Sirius in the sky. She might be particularly bright this night. But there also is a lot of pride and ambition, some level of positivity as well from a mundane level, and just looking at the overall feeling of people and being able to enjoy the space that they're in. This brings in the potential of leadership and the role that leadership plays in this chart as well. As Sara spoke to, this Venus also ruling the 5th and the 6th house, it also rules the 10th house, which in a mundane chart like this represents the leadership, the current leadership. And that's that Venus. We see that the leadership in this new moon from another perspective is really heightened. And we're really looking at our leadership, and they're putting on potentially quite a big show for us, as we'll see once we switch to the dials. And I think the other point, and when you, from a quadrant house perspective, this Venus would actually get moved to the 8th house, which is, we see a couple of things in here saying that maybe the leadership is in a stressful place. There's anxiety around the leadership. We have the South Node conjunct the MC, suggesting that there's some potential of loss or fear of loss. Really, I see fear in the current leadership at this point. And there's a lot, I won't go into the details of it, but there's a really big emphasis within the government this year or this month in terms of foreign relations. And it makes me wonder what's happening. We have the foreign relations and foreign money really overlapped in a myriad of different ways in this chart. And I'm curious to see what that story ends up being, because it does look like it's probably a continuation of what we already know is going on between Russia, Ukraine, Palestine, or Hamas, and Israel. So yeah, there's a lot of focus, it looks like, from that perspective.
Yeah. And I think in previous podcasts, we talked about the prominence of Neptune. And this month in particular, it shows up really strong. It's at the crisis degree, very close to the Aries points, which is the Aries point represents the world axis. And how is Neptune influencing our global understandings? And I think there's the piece, like you said, with the leadership that just has to do, it's the smoke and mirrors. I don't think the world of politics exists without smoke and mirrors, but it's very Neptunian in terms of our ability to be deceived, to deceive ourselves, to not necessarily see things as they are. And I think now would probably be a good time to go to the dial, because the dial shows more explicitly some of the shadow material that's coming up for us collectively right now.
So here's the 360 dial. And one of the other pieces that I think is really important about this Neptune is that at the time of this new moon, Neptune will have stationed retrograde just 3 days prior. Around this time, I would suspect that things will be feeling very Neptunian in general, where people may want to escape a little bit more, where we might be getting big delusional shows from our leaders in different ways. We might see a lot of really interesting commercials or infomercials or different sorts of ways that they're putting their message out there that feels like it's pulling you into something bigger and something important, but also right on the edge of also being pulled into something that's a complete lie. So yes, very strong. And in this chart, we have this at the Aries point right now. And Neptune is very closely connected with the Aries point, as is Poseidon, which has a similar but more elevated message and energetic to Neptune, which is basically a reiteration of what I just said, which is that there's a potential of great inspiration and just feeling like you're part of something much bigger and something high-minded, but also that there's this grand deception behind it as well.
Yeah, and a piece of those planetary influences that speaks so much to we're all connected. So
Mhm.
these events happening on the other side of the planet, Neptune's going to remind us that it hits closer to home than we think, that we can't really be separate from those world events. When you see Neptune Poseidon on the world axis, like, what are our boundaries, our psychic, physical boundaries? Like, we are connected to the suffering of all people.
Yes.
And so there could be, which indicates like a magnification or an eruption of something unpredictable, unprecedented, unforeseen. At the same time, Lisa, could you switch to the picture on the lunation? Was
Yeah.
it there that we see?
What?
I'm looking for the shadow material where Venus ends up on the midpoint between the lunation and
That's that's when we just go to Venus.
S. Yeah, because I think this really tells the story that we're seeing with the Hades Chronos, this shadow material, the underworld story, the things surfacing. And specifically this month, they're connected with the lunation and specifically around the themes of women. We were talking earlier about how a lot of the political issues, the ideological issues right now are hinging on the rights of women, both with reproductive rights as well as some of the dissent in the Baptist church right now, with them trying to decide whether they want women to be in leadership or not. I think this planetary picture demonstrates that really well. And we
Yeah.
also Chiron Zeus, which is literally the wounds around fertility.
Yeah. And we also see that both the Aries, the cardinal axis, as well as Neptune, Poseidon are still tied into this. So what we were just talking about previously is also tied into the story as well. And I was just speaking with Sarah before we started about some snippet that I found in the news about Trump looking to adjust his campaign in order to make his platform pro-abortion in some way, allowing for abortion and not being completely pro-life, which is a huge shift for the Republican Party. And it was really interesting to listen to these conversations that are happening. And just Sarah and I were having the discussion of, wow, I mean, that even though that's depending on where you stand, a crazy concept and possibly a little bit scary, maybe, that, that, I mean, it's the smoke and mirrors, right? Almost using women and like women's reproduction as a smoke and mirrors in order to gain recognition and gain, in order to win the election, basically, and gain approval. Because there's a lot, this brings the foreign relations in as well, which a lot of people who are on the left side are really unhappy with this stuff, with how things are being handled with the foreign relations. And a lot of those votes could be potentially pulled in if there's the potential to sway women's abortion rights under Trump. So yeah, really interesting stuff happening right now. And I think part of this Neptune Poseidon is not knowing where the lines are, right? Before, the lines were always very clear between the parties. And I think this represents that using women's issues, the lines are now being potentially very skewed and not having a clear perspective of what it means to be on either side of the party line. And so I think that could potentially be a big conversation that we're having. And we see that also being stated with the Apollon, with the node Apollon, where lots of people are coming together in order to discuss this issue. And there's a lot of conversation around this issue as well of women's reproductive rights.
The fact that Venus is literally on the node Apollon midpoint, that regardless of your politics or how you look at it, the acknowledgement that the women's voice matters enough to
Yeah.
throw an election one way or the other, or that it's being considered and held in that way, is really seen in the astrology of this year,
Mm.
and particularly this month. And so it'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
Yeah. And it just made me think about the huge ninth house emphasis that I believe was the Aries ingress chart. There was that huge emphasis on the ninth house. And when we were looking at it first as legal matters, and then I think we started looking at it as, oh, it's the schools having all of their protests. And now when we're looking at it from this perspective, it's religion. And what are your beliefs on things? Because this is something that from a more conservative perspective, that being pro-life has been purely, it's what the church says. And it's a deep held belief from the roots of the Christian faith, predominantly, at least in our country. And that's being challenged, and that's being really focused on as well as women.
And I think women are starting, even conservative women are starting to fear the repercussions of aligning their religious dogma with the law.
Yes.
Where do you,
Yeah,
where,
it's
I know there's a lot of fear around women's rights beyond, if we lose our right to control our bodies and our fertility journeys, then, what next?
yeah, I think that this potential move by Trump is going to completely spin people's heads and put them in a position that maybe they never thought that they would be in. And I think that is probably true
And yeah,
for people of
so
all.
there's that last picture too with that Uranus Volcanus, like anything could happen. Anything
Yeah.
could happen.
Yeah. Sudden revolutionary forces, like things that you just thunderbolts out of the sky, just changing the direction that you thought that everything was going in. And I think that this information will enter people's awareness as a thunderbolt. And then they'll end up in a reality where the landscape is very unfamiliar and potentially feel disorienting. And also not really knowing where everybody stands anymore, because where 2020 really shook things up in a lot of ways, where we weren't sure where people stood anymore, like the potential of this happening could also have that same sort of effect on the cardinal axis, which means that it is within the ether of everything. This isn't just specific to any part of the chart. This is being fed through the vent system of the entire United States, basically.
Mm-hmm. And I think one of the things we need to do on a personal level is address some of that fear. Um, how do we mitigate the fear within ourselves? I'm thinking about how to constructively use this Neptune Poseidon. Like, how do we, in a world of uncertainty, in a world of a lot of, oh, you know what I just saw that we'd seen earlier is the Cupido ascendant, is that as things became more clannish in 2020, I think that
Mhm.
it created a kind of fear of letting people know what you think, or not feeling safe unless you're safety in numbers. And I
Mhm.
think that's going to just carry on with this election cycle, because with that Cupido there, the safety in numbers, the safety, people wanting to be with like-minded people because of all of the instability, and
Mhm.
trying to personalize some of that. How can we mitigate some of that fear, and how can we utilize some of that Neptune constructively, some of that, like you were saying earlier about the creative potential? How can we use that constructively in the month ahead?
Yeah. One of the things, if we turn this a little bit to the Venus, Neptune, Poseidon as well, which tends to be so prominent, is finding compassion for other people and finding compassion for women who have different perspectives on what's happening. While we can get pulled into the shock of the way that we thought our world was constructed being altered in some core way, with this alignment, it looks like there's also the potential to see all sides and have compassion for what that means. We're all equally being thrown into the blender of uncertainty with some of the occurrences that could be happening this month.
Maybe this speaks to, with that sort of boundaryless energy of Neptune, maybe this speaks to not being so divisive, especially like with women, like not dividing over ideology, but coming together just as a force within ourselves, a Venusian force, and hold the space for those different opinion in a way that, like you said, is a little bit more compassionate and channels some of that Venus and Neptune, like
Mm.
the goddess.
There's a lot of fertility in this chart. I will say that speaking to that goddess energy, that there's some tough stuff. We have Kronos and we have Hades really strongly playing in, but there's a lot of fertility. There's a lot of potential for creativity and creating a new world that could be surprising as well. Is that if these shifts, and maybe we're not even pointing it to it directly, maybe it's something that it's not even on our radar, but whatever shift happens this month, we have the ability to rethink and remold the world around us because we do have this awareness that we're all so deeply connected.
Yeah.
So, so yeah, I think that was all of the ways that we were going to look at this and so the main themes that were coming up. Is there anything else you wanted to add about this?
Happy new moon, fellow stargazers. The month to feel the feels, to ground down, hopefully to have some fun, to let the creative impulses fly.
Definitely where you can clear your calendars and find some time to relax, because Neptune energy that we're going to be feeling is going to be potentially overwhelming and it really wants us to settle in and have some fun and enjoy and take the stuff off of our to-do lists where we can in order to just connect with one another and be able to find that compassion. Because with Neptune, if you're in that heightened stress state, then you end up getting into some of the shadow points of Neptune.
Yeah, you get sick.
Yeah.
You get overwhelmed, you check out, you
Yeah.
get sick. So you might as well just lay yourself down in a patch of grass right at the beginning of the month.
Just preemptively say, I'm preemptively sicking myself or whatever, not getting sick, basically. And so find the time to let your body relax. It's been a really active time this past month, and hopefully there has been quite a bit of Neptune influence. You're probably feeling that too, getting pulled more inward, and just surrender to that. It's okay. It's okay to not be doing things all the time. Yeah. I need to remember that too. Okay, so Sarah and I will be back with another new moon lunation forecast, and that will come out on August 4th. I'm not sure if we're going to be able to get anything else out before then, because as you guys know, we are in the midst of summer break. It was really nice to be here with you today, Sarah, and everybody else out there. Thank you so much for being here and listening and letting us give you some insight for this next month.
Yeah.
Until next time. Bye, everybody.